My name is Donald Busisala. I'm a program manager with the Discoverability Network at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and you are here today for a presentation or workshop, whichever term you prefer, on surviving the job search. However, before we dive into the material, as our president and fearless leader, Rocco Rossi, would say, although we're meeting in cyberspace, we do want to acknowledge that the work we do takes place on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Our regional hubs and partners across Canada similarly gather on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. And because I'm a big fan of history, I think it's important to note that we are indebted to the Indigenous populations, not just for the stewardship of the land, but also for certain ideas and concepts. In particular, the democratic governments of North America drew inspiration not just from ancient Greece, but also from democratic style institutions developed completely independently by Indigenous populations in North America. So lots of history there, and we would definitely encourage reading up on it, or I would anyway.
Donald, can you
yes.
make mention of what about the slide deck? Will people be receiving a copy of the slide deck for today?
So yes, they will. We'll send it out to the to everyone who has registered, and that's not a problem. So to begin with, I just want to outline a bit of what we're going to discuss today. We will talk about what a job search is, of course, and what it entails. We'll discuss tools that people use during their job search and tools that are available to you. We will talk about some strategies for being successful in your job search, as well as how to maintain your perspective and what to expect in terms of potential timing, and metrics for a successful job search. So ways to evaluate how you're searching and the effectiveness of it. However, in case you are not familiar with the Discoverability Network, we would like to give you a bit of insight as to who we are and what our program is all about. The Discoverability Network is a free program for everybody, operated by the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, which facilitates connections between job seekers with disabilities and inclusive employers in order to address workforce needs. So we have a free online job matching platform where job seekers are matched to jobs based on job preference as well as fit for the job. We provide free training and workshops on a host of disability and employment related topics, such as the one you're attending today. And we operate networking events that connect all stakeholders and bring them all together in order to learn from each other, build confidence, and hear about best practices and share success stories. If you would like to join the Discoverability Network, which we certainly encourage you to do, we think it could be a powerful tool in your toolkit. Please visit the website you see on your screen and feel free to sign up. There will be more information as to how to sign up or who you can contact for support or questions at the end of the presentation. I was going to say a bit later, but it'll be right at the end. So now to dive right into it. What is job search? This is the easiest part of the workshop. Obviously, it's people who are seeking employment, but seeking employment can mean many different things. It could be people who are unemployed. That's, I think, what we often think of. But it could be people who are underemployed, someone who wants full-time work, but maybe their current job is only able to offer 15 hours a week. It could be discontent with a current position or a desire for advancement or better opportunities. We all eventually want to grow and develop. We want new opportunities. So we may need to look elsewhere outside of our current organization or for different roles within our organization. And of course, sometimes we just get tired of the job we're doing, or maybe we got a job just out of necessity and it's not necessarily what we want to be doing. So we know that we're going to want to find something else. It can be stressful. One of the things that I think is important is that we acknowledge difficult truths. I always say that a hard truth is preferable to a pleasant lie. And so the hard truth here is that job searching can be stressful. It can be successful as well, and we'll talk about that. But regardless of who you are, what your age is, gender, ethnicity, ability, all of those factors, it can be a stressful process. It can take 2 to 6 months to find a job. Sometimes it can take longer, depending on the kind of job you're looking for. It's important to be patient. You're not running a race. You're not trying to get there as well. You may want to get there as quickly as possible, but you're looking for the right job. And that's what's really important, is finding the job that is what you want. And that just takes time. And of course, COVID has made this even more of a process, or even more difficult, because we have certain sectors of the economy that are closing and partially opening and then closing again and then opening. And so it's hard to plan for the long term when you're not sure what's going to happen in 6 months. The importance of staying positive and maintaining a healthy mindset is going to be a big contributor to your success. If you're impatient or hard on yourself, you're going to become demotivated, or you may just start making careless mistakes, right? If you become impatient and are too hard on yourself, and you're already basically deciding that something's not going to work before you do it, you're not setting yourself up for success. You're likely to write better cover letters, interview better, and that's a really important one, when you are open to all the possibilities that come your way, and when you remain positive. So interviewing for roles that are, maybe not exactly what you want, is still a great way to remain productive. You see progress in your job search, and you never know, you may find something that is really appropriate for you that you didn't realize, because you interviewed for a job that maybe you applied for it with a bit of uncertainty, but it's still a good idea to go to the interview. You'll get some practice, and you may learn things about it that you didn't know before you went in. If you can maintain a daily routine of healthy activities, that helps. Walking is great exercise, gets those happy chemicals in your brain flowing. It is a great way to maintain a positive attitude. You always want to be active. If we're sitting on the couch for 8 hours a day, we're not going to be as happy, even if we're entertained. And meditating, practicing deep breathing, mindfulness, we hear a lot about that these days. These are all great ways to maintain a healthy routine and stay positive. I know some people aren't planners. I know some people like spontaneity, and I've known plenty of them. I've had lots of friends who say, I just like to let things happen. But when it comes to job searching, a plan is very helpful. It doesn't have to be a plan for every minute of every day, but if you organize yourself, you have a sense of control, and you also have a legitimate amount of control over what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how well you're prepared for it. If you know what you intend to do, you can actually prepare for what you're going to do. So scheduling your job search rather than allowing it to creep into your personal time is a really good way to maintain balance in your life. And you can also see progress when you're tracking what you do. You don't have to have a very detailed Excel sheet, but even if you're just keeping an agenda or a calendar, you can see when you've been invited to job interviews. You can see what jobs you've applied for if you want to track them. You can see that, hey, maybe I, off the top of my head, it feels like I haven't done much, but then you look at your list and realize, well, I applied to 15 jobs this week. That's not bad. So it's good to have those things in place. And although it can seem overwhelming, a really simple method of preventing that from becoming a problem is to break it into manageable parts. So don't focus on the whole picture, focus on what you're doing that day. If you're going to work on your resume, then work on your resume. Don't try to work on your resume while thinking about, all the different types of jobs you want to apply for, and so on and so forth. Get your resume into the format you want, and then look at your resume in comparison with the jobs you want to apply for. So manageable pieces. And we'll talk about planning and a method of planning a bit later. So we've talked a lot about the process, requiring a plan or how much a plan helps, as well as the importance of remaining positive. So it's important to remember that it's quite the process. It's multifaceted, it involves many elements, and it's going to be a number of different steps that get you to where you want to be. Odds are good you're not going to just take a resume, apply for a job, and get the first job that you want right off the hop. You need to be prepared to do some work. You need to be prepared to learn as you go. You need to be ready to accept constructive feedback. You may get feedback on your resume. You may get feedback on your responses to interview questions. You can ask for feedback from people you know. Whether or not your job search is successful is affected by really a great many factors, and some are out of your control. The COVID-19 pandemic is a perfect example of what's outside of your control. We have no control over when governments are going to shut down certain sectors of the economy, or which ones are not going to be able to hire a full complement of staff because of certain restrictions. However, you should focus on the actions that are within your control. The last thing that anyone wants to do or should want to do is give in to what's called an external locus of control. So basically, that means acknowledging or deciding that everything related to your success is outside of your control. You're placing control over your life and your success and the outcomes of your efforts in the hands of some external force. That's not healthy. Although there are some things that are outside of our control, it's not helpful to assume that all of them are. What you do with your resume is within your control. What jobs you're applying for and how many you're applying for are within your control. How you perform in an interview is within your control. There are a lot of things that are within your control when you're job searching, including the myriad number of tools available for you to use, and we'll discuss those again in a little bit. It's important to trust your plan. As you see the tip in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen there. You want to make sure that you're assessing what works, what's bringing you results, what's getting you interviews or at least responses, and things that aren't working. If you're doing something that's not working, it's better to adjust it than keep doing it. And I do really like this idea of rewarding yourself. And I'm going to ask for some suggestions from one of my colleagues here in a moment about, how they might reward themselves. But for me, I think of, I don't know if anybody's going to be familiar with it. I think of a program I used to watch, I still watch sometimes, called Twin Peaks. And at one point, one of the characters is explaining to the other that every now and then, once a day, maybe a couple times a week, you need to give yourself a treat. It could be a pie, it could be a cup of coffee, it could be just taking time to read a book that you want, but give yourself a treat. And this is the same idea. Give yourself a reward. You're doing a lot of work when you're trying to when you're trying to find a job. You're spending a certain amount of time looking for work. Give yourself opportunities to do things that motivate you and that make you feel good, right? You do so many hours of job searching during the week, and then you give yourself a reward or a treat or a break, and it becomes reinforcing because you feel like you're sort of earning those rewards or those treats. Now, I said I was going to ask for some ideas. So Elizabeth, I'm going to ask my colleague Elizabeth if she maybe could give us some ideas of how you might reward. I know you're not, well, I hope you're not job searching right now because we like having you on the team, but when you are job searching, how might you reward yourself? How might you give yourself a treat?
Well, there are three things that I do. I go for walks during the weeks, usually at the end of the day after a hard day of job searching, just to get some fresh air and some exercise, which is good for your physical health and your mental health. I will also plan to have a favorite meal for dinner, at least once a week. Something that I really enjoy eating that I can look forward to. And as an extra special treat, I go to the bookstore. I go to Chapters and I browse the books. I look at the books. Sometimes I end up buying a book that I really love. And then I know as another special treat, I can go and read it later on. So that's what I do to reward myself.
Well, thanks. Those are good examples. The walking is an interesting one. It hits on the comments we made about exercise and staying positive and how that helps. But it also gives you a chance to clear your head and get away from the, everything you've been doing at home, probably in front of the computer related to job searching. So very, very good idea.
Pie seems to be quite popular too.
Sorry, what?
In
Oh,
the
pie.
chat,
Yes.
people are saying pie.
Yeah, well, pie is delicious. I'm not looking at the chat, but I'd be curious as to what everybody's favorite pie is. I'm partial to blueberry personally. So, continuing on. we want to talk a bit about strategies related to your job search. And at this point, just before I go into strategies around job searching, I do want to give people a chance to ask questions. Are there any questions around what we've just talked about, around just the importance of creating a plan, self-motivation, staying positive, and just the general process? I'm assuming since, okay, let me look at the chat here. Okay, I'm assuming, oh, pecan. Somebody did answer my question about pie. Very good. I'm assuming since nobody has raised a hand, put anything in the chat, or unmuted to ask a question, that there aren't any questions about the first part. So, strategizing about your job search. There are a number of different things to consider. One is what tools you're using and what tools you need, and making sure that they're ready for you to use, that they're going to be effective. For instance, and we'll get into the details, but if you, LinkedIn can be a job search tool, but if you just create a LinkedIn profile and do nothing with it, it's not really ready for you to use, and it's not going to be very effective. You need to consider how, when, and where you're going to look for jobs, where you're searching for jobs, whether or not you're using job boards, whether or not you're using job matching platforms. Are you hitting the pavement, so to speak? What's your strategy, and what's your timing, what's your schedule? You want to create a job search story. It doesn't have to include your disability. It could. That really is a personal decision that's entirely up to you. But you want to have a memorable story about why you're searching for a job and why you're searching for the kind of job you are. And you need to know what you need. And we're referring to accommodations here. You may not necessarily require an accommodation for a job. However, you do need to know your skills and your limitations. And you need to know, if you're applying for a role and it looks like you might need an accommodation, what that accommodation might be or why you need it. And we'll talk more about accommodations later. Well, really, we're going to talk more about all this, but I know accommodations is a bit later. So to begin with, why plan your job search? I mean, you can see some reasons on the screen there. Again, I'd invite maybe Megan or Elizabeth. Megan's another colleague of mine, by the way. I'm not inviting random people to speak. But would either of you have any insights into why you might plan your job search?
I think for me, and this is just very important, because job search can deal with a lot of rejection, and I want to set meaningful goals during my job search that I've applied for, let's say, 5 jobs per week, or something measurable, or 2 or 3 jobs per day. And then I know that when I go back and look at it like a log or a chart I've created of my progress, I know that I'm still trying and doing my best in this kind of difficult process to achieve a meaningful goal of getting a job and measuring my success in applying for a certain number of jobs every week.
Yeah, that is a very good example. And you can see some of the others on the screen here. Maintaining motivation, obviously, you have sort of goals you set for yourself. You'll know whether or not you hit them. You want to make sure your goals are meaningful and achievable. If your goal is just strictly get hired, you're going to be waiting a while until you hit that goal, or you might get lucky and might not have to wait a while, but it's good to have smaller goals along the way, such as, to Elizabeth's point, applying for a certain number of jobs during a week. And keeping yourself organized, tracking what you're doing, following up so that you're making sure that you stay on the top of mind for employers whom you're applying to, making sure that when you're scheduling interviews and tracking dates, you're not potentially double booking yourself or creating conflicts, and managing your time effectively. We talked about making sure that the job search doesn't creep into your personal time. You do want to maintain that balance, and that will be a good practice for when you are actually working. Although to a certain extent, our work schedule is, it's really, I don't want to say it's out of our control, but it's not 100% within our control either. The workplace we're in is going to really dictate much of our schedule, but our work-life balance is something that we want to maintain. And if you've been doing that during your job search, you're going to be more prepared to do that when you're at work as well. I do see there's a question. So is there an applicant tracking system platform you would suggest where one can run through the resume based on the job specifications? That is an interesting question. I'm not aware of a specific applicant tracking system that would allow you to do that. However, platforms like, and to sort of give a bit of a plug for our program, the Discoverability Network, will allow you to do that to a certain extent. So when you're on our platform, you'll get matched to jobs based on the kind of jobs you're looking for and whether or not you're a match for what a job posting is asking for. And when that happens, you'll be able to see. So could we ask that people please keep themselves muted? If you are not going to ask a question, there's no reason to unmute, so please keep the microphone off. Thank you. Sorry, Rahesh, to continue answering your question. On platforms like the Discoverability Network, on our platform, when you're matched to a job, you'll be able to see why you're matched to the job. You'll actually get a list, sort of like a checklist, of everything that the job posting is asking for. And you'll see little check marks beside where you match up, where there's overlap between your skills, work history, education, and so on and so forth with what the job posting is asking for. So you'll have an idea as to why you were matched, what you have that they're looking for, and what you might be willing to, what might you need to be willing to learn or improve upon were you to take that job. In terms of, a platform where you can just throw your resume in and see how that connects with a bunch of different jobs, I'm not aware of something like that. It's a great idea. If I had more money.
Can I add something to that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, you go right ahead.
So will I also be provided to improve on, apart from the ones that you mentioned, that I'll be the sections will be highlighted as to what made me match with that job. So if I see the other way around, will I also be given the feedback where I can improve based on the job specifications?
So you'll be able to see where you could, so it's not so much about improving when you're matched as much as knowing what you have versus what you don't have, in which case you can identify where you might need to either, like I said, be willing to be trained or learn some new skills, or where you might need to improve, right? So for instance, you might be matched based on education and work history, but maybe the job requires certain computer skills that you don't have. You need to make a decision as to whether or not you're willing to learn those and be trained, or if you maybe need to develop those skills before you, apply for a job of that nature. So feedback will really come from if you're applying for a job, then some employers might provide feedback. Our system isn't necessarily going to provide that directly. The idea is when you're seeing the job matches, you'll see where you match up and where you don't, and you'll be able to identify, what you might be missing or what you need to be able to improve on. That
makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Donald, for your input.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad it makes sense. It's always good to know. Thank you for the question. So when we're talking about goals, it's important to know what your goal is. And obviously your goal is going to be to get a job, but you should have more detail than that. If you just say my goal is to get a job, that's sort of boring and to be expected, and it's not going to be helpful for you because it's not specific enough. You're going to want to know where you want to get a job, why you want to get a job, why you want the job you're looking for, so on and so forth. And you want to know how you're going to tell your story to achieve that goal. That's what's really important here, is how does your story connect with your goal? Obviously, the goal is the final achievement, the end result. But why is that the goal? Do you really want any job? Some people do. Some people just want a job and they're willing to do anything. But not everybody does. Some people want to change fields. They want to do something different. So think about your work-related experience, your expertise, your achievements, and put those into your story. What you've done, how you've done it, the things that you've accomplished, and why that has led you to have the goal that you're currently pursuing with respect to the jobs that you want. This same theme or story is going to be used across all of your job search tools, because in the end, all of your job search tools are just different ways of telling this story and connecting it to your goal. So you want to have some consistency across all of your tools and the story that you're telling. And it is important because, just as an example, if your resume says one thing and you say something else in an interview, and then say your LinkedIn account says something completely different, that's going to be a little bit confusing for potential employers. So again, consistency is a good thing generally. So I said we'd talk about goals and goal planning. And this is you may have heard of SMART goals. This is a widely used and widely suggested goal planning tool across many different fields. But SMART stands for specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely. So by specific, we mean goals that are clear, right? I mean, get a job is clear. If you know the field you want to work in, you could be more specific. I want to get a job in retail. If you know that you're not ready for full-time work, I want to find a part-time job in retail. So the more specific you can be, the more effective your planning is going to be. And that doesn't mean you should limit your employment options, but your goals shouldn't be, what kind of example can I use? Basically, your goals shouldn't be this sort of overgeneralization of what you want to do. I want to find a job at some point and earn some kind of money. That's not really very specific or helpful. It's going to be hard to plan around. Your goals should be measurable, right? So if your goal is, I want to find a part-time job in retail, that is very measurable. You'll know when you've accomplished that. Maybe that's ambitious. Maybe you have smaller goals. My goal is going to be to apply to part-time retail jobs 3 times a week. That's very measurable. Have you done it 3 times a week? Yes, you have. No, you haven't. Easy to track, easy to see whether or not you're doing it. They should be actionable. They should be things you can do. So for me, you can't see it, but over there are a couple telescopes. I love astronomy. I can't do higher math. There is absolutely no way that me becoming an astronomer would be an actionable, or to the next point, realistic goal, because there's nothing I could do to achieve it. So your goals should be things that you can act on, and they should be realistic. Doesn't mean you can't be ambitious, but you need to be pursuing goals that you are legitimately able to achieve. Maybe you want to be a florist. Maybe you like the moon. Being a florist on the moon is not an achievable goal, but being a florist is an achievable goal or a realistic goal. And they should be timely. They should be things that you can set a timeline for that are reasonable. So going back to I'm going to apply to 3 part-time retail jobs per week. I'm going to do this for 3 months. And over that time, I want to have 5 interviews. That gives you a timeline. It gives you clear things to assess. Did you apply to 3 jobs a week for 3 months? Did you get the 5 interviews over those 3 months that you were looking for? If you did, then you want to look at whether or not you were successful. If you didn't, then you want to look at what you're doing and maybe you need to change something. Oh, hey, there you go. There's an example right there for you. Secure full-time entry-level community service worker position in the Greater Toronto Area at $16 an hour. So how do you evaluate results and how do you track things? First, you want to give it time. The first 2 months, you're developing a baseline, you're learning about how to use your tools and what kind of responses you're getting, and you're not likely to see immediate results. Again, job searching, as we said earlier, often, it might take 2 to 6 months to find a job. You want to make sure that you are kind to yourself. And we're not talking about giving yourself a treat in this case. We're talking about not being hard on yourself, right? Every minute, every hour you spend searching for a job or working towards your goal, your goal may be education related, perhaps it's not specifically, work related, but every moment you spend working on that goal moves you closer to achieving it. Even the things that don't work get you closer to your goal. And the reason for that is it's very important to know what doesn't work, just like it's very important to know what we don't want. It helps you refine your efforts. It helps you narrow your focus on what does work and what you do want. And that speaks to the next point, which is what is working? Where are the results coming from? What are you doing that's getting you the results you want? And what have you done that hasn't? If something isn't working, change it. Absolutely, if something is working, don't change it, right? Don't fix what isn't broken. But if you've been doing something for 3 months and you've had no results, odds are good there is something in your process that is not working, so you want to try something else. And if you're not sure, ask for advice. Friends, family, career counselors, job coaches are all all places that you can go for insight or advice. People who know you, people who have experience with job searching, and they can help you figure out how you might want to adapt your practices. And it's important to remember you're going to get better as you do this more. The more you job search, the more you use your tools, the more you're going to improve. And that's the case with anything. So the second strategy here is identifying your skills. And we do have some suggestions for identifying skills. You can see sort of on the screen, obviously, the importance of knowing your skills and identifying them. You want to be able to speak to your abilities. You want to play to your strengths. And you also want to know what your limitations are or areas for improvement might be so that you can work on them or so that you can identify them. If you're applying for a job where you know you can do 75% of it, but you're going to need training on the other 25%, it's much better to be aware of it and prepared for it. It helps you be confident, and it helps you set yourself up for success. Elizabeth, I don't know if, just because I know I'm going to go into some suggestions for this in a moment, but do you have any methods that you typically use when you're considering your skills, how you might identify them, or how you might identify some of your areas for improvement? You are muted.
Thank you. I certainly am not adverse to seeking advice, either through informational interviews, talking to someone in my job, industry, or career field who can see my resume and know what skills that I am looking for or that I have that are assets to the job or jobs that I'm applying for. I'll also talk to career counselors a lot of times. And I do my research on the internet about the industry and jobs I'm applying for and what organizations are looking for and they're hiring candidates to see about what skills I can upgrade on.
Very good. Okay, thank you. That was quite thorough. I'm just responding to a question in the chat here. I thought I had a few more moments. There we go. Okay. Never mind that my picture in the chat is of a woman. That's me on other days of the week. So I said we would talk about some ideas of how to identify skills. And just to the point of the question I answered in the chat, we are going to talk more about tools in a little bit, so there will be more information on that. But when we think of identifying skills, abilities, limitations or areas for improvement, dominant, less dominant personality traits, it helps sometimes to go through a sort of self-discovery process. And we are going to share one with you here. It's the Align Personality Assessment. You can see the website on the screen there if you'd like to visit it. It is a free personality assessment. And what it will do is it will help you identify transferable skills. It will also help you identify your dominant and more dominant personality traits. It will explain how those elements of your personality interact, and it will give you a number of different things that you can then integrate into your job search process. One is language. So you see this jumble of words on the screen. When you complete the assessment, you will receive a jumble like this that identifies your dominant personality traits and your less dominant ones. So the words that are larger and in the center are your more dominant personality traits. The ones that are smaller and towards the outside of the word jumble are your less dominant personality traits. And that's very useful when you are describing yourself. It's also very useful when you're applying for jobs to know that. And I don't have, I'm not going to use an example from this word jumble, but let's just say that extroverted or sociable is in there, is a very small word on the outside of the word jumble. And that's not a very dominant personality trait of yours. Very good to be aware of, because you can still apply for jobs that require you to be sociable. Maybe you still apply for a customer service position, but you're then aware that that's not one of your more dominant personality traits, and you're going to need to adapt in the workplace. So again, it really helps with being prepared. It also helps you identify jobs that play to your strengths or your more dominant personality traits. So when we are talking about skills lists or skills inventories, which is just a fancy way of saying a list, we're really talking about having an idea of, a very robust and well-developed idea of what you're good at and where those skills fall, what categories they fall under, which helps when you're looking for a job. So you see some examples here: business skills, communication, creative, artistic, management, number skills, people skills, and so on and so forth. This is not what your list is going to look like. You're not going to list business skills as a skill in your skills inventory, but you will list skills under headings like these so you can keep yourself organized and you can see how some of these skills might go together or how they connect with certain jobs, right? Number skills, so skills related to mathematics, accounting, calculating, so on and so forth, are going to connect very directly to jobs that require you to use numbers. And that doesn't just mean being a registered accountant. If you're working in, I keep using a retail environment, so let's not. If you're working in a food service environment and you're operating the cash register, you're going to need number skills. I know we're all very used to cash registers and computers doing the numbers for us and punching all the numbers and digits in on those things, but you still need to know how they go together. Often you're still going to have to count the cash at the end of the day. And if the system goes down, it's really helpful to know that you're able to do the math required to process transactions, because then you can keep processing transactions. And I know that sounds far-fetched. How often does that happen? Well, I worked in, well, it's not really a restaurant, it's a family-run burger place when I was a teenager. And the power did go off one day and we wanted to stay open. And shockingly, I was the only person who could figure out how to work out the tax on purchases. I mean, the managers could, but they were the ones who were responsible for operating the grill and whatnot. So I ended up running the cash for several hours simply because I had those very basic skills. So again, very good to know what you're capable of and what categories they fall under. Communication skills, things like verbal communication, strong written communication. If you have those listed, it'll help you connect them to the jobs that you are potentially going to look for. So we talked about creating a story. And when you know your skills and abilities, you're going to be much better at telling your story. And it's going to be the story of you, but it's going to be the story of you in a very specific way. You're going to talk about your abilities, what you can do, what you do well, why you do it well. And of course, this is going to relate to your skills. What skills do you have? How did you acquire them? How are you improving on them? How are you growing your skill set? Your work experience and your education should be tied into your story. You may have a little of one, a lot of the other. You may have a little of both. There may be gaps. That's okay. You still want to tie them into your story. If there are gaps, just make sure you understand why, and that you're able to include that in your story in a way that still focuses on your abilities. You might have a 5-year gap in your work history. It's important to know why. Maybe it's due to a disability. You don't have to disclose what that disability is. Maybe it's due to something else. Maybe it's due to just things that happened in your personal life. Again, you don't have to disclose what they are, but being able to say, yep, there's a 5-year gap in my work history. There are things going on in my personal life that I had to attend to, and then explain why your skills are still relevant, how your skills remain sharp and effective, and focus on your abilities. And of course, you're going to talk about how you do things differently. What sets you apart from other people? I'm going to stop for a moment because I realize I've been talking for a while. And I know there was a question, which is great, but I haven't actually invited anyone to ask questions. So if there are any questions about those first 2 elements of strategizing your job search around making a plan or knowing your skills and your dominant and lesser dominant personality traits, please feel free to ask them. And I'm going to assume that the deafening silence means that there are no questions, so I will continue. I said we would talk about tools. I know somebody asked about tools in the chat, and I gave a bit of a teaser into what we were going to talk about. So this is the part where we'll discuss the tools. Your job search tools are going to be very important. They're going to either make you confident in your job search, or if you feel like your tools aren't great or you're not very happy with them, you're going to be less confident. So you want to have tools that you're confident in. And you can ask people I mentioned family, friends, career counselors, job coaches, really anybody you know and respect who is in the employment field, supporting people for employment, or maybe they have a successful career that you're interested in, to review your tools and give you some some feedback. It's always good to be able to get somebody else's eyes on something and find out what they think, because often people will see things that, that we don't. And make sure you find at least 3 great references. And they should be references that can speak to your ability to do a job. As much as possible, it's better not to use family members unless it's very particularly relevant. And that is, but that's a rare circumstance. I can certainly think of one instance when I used my father as a reference, and I was applying for a brick and stone masonry apprenticeship because of work that I had done with him actually on one of his work sites. He didn't work in construction, he worked in film, but we did sort of stuff constructing a set together. And so that was legitimate. But the only reason I used it is because I didn't have any other reference for that kind of work. As much as possible, you want to find references that are either professional, based on volunteer work, or educators, or if you have employment support from a job coach or a career counselor, they can be great references as well. So, job search tools. I'm going to ask a question. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Hi, Froila. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. But just as a thought, do you think it's generally better to use, well, the answer's on the screen. It says pick search tools. I was going to ask if it's better to use more than one tool or only one tool, but okay, the answer's on the screen. So never mind, forget my question. There are a number of different tools though, and it is better to use more than one. Really, you want to use as many as possible and what is appropriate to you. So your story, your job search story, or your elevator pitch, which is what we mean by in 3 lines or less, is going to be one tool. It's what you're saying about yourself that is quick and to the point and makes you stand out so that people remember who you are. Your resume, cover letter, and references are 3 tools that always go together. Your resume is going to tell your story specifically related to your education, work history, and skills related to the job that you're applying for. Your cover letter is going to connect all those elements even more directly to the job you're applying for, as you state very clearly why you're applying for a certain job and why you would be a good fit. And then your resume enhances what you've said. And your references are going to tell your story for you about why you'd be a great fit for a job and why somebody should hire you. And then there are this host of other tools. So you see interview skills. That is going to follow very quickly after the resume and cover letter. Once you get brought into an interview, you're going to then be telling your story, responding to very specific questions and tying it into what you're being asked for in the interview. Networking and informational interviews, potential mentors and sponsors may connect with each other. Networking could be, LinkedIn is really the best professional networking site where you can learn about other professionals, what they're doing, as well as follow companies and see what's going on with them, whether or not they're hiring, what they have to say. Informational interviews are great sources of information. They're great ways to learn from people who might have experience that you're looking for or that you could benefit from. Mentors can provide, ongoing insights into things that you're interested in and advice for your job search. Professional organizations, professional networks, social media, all are tools you can use. Professional organizations could, maybe you're involved with an employment service organization. That would be one example. Your digital presence, if you have a website, obviously a tool you can use and you have complete control over what's on the website. You may not have your own website though, so networks like LinkedIn, or even if you're using Facebook or Twitter, making sure that those sites and the content that you're including on them is appropriate and the kind of thing that you might want employers to see will be very helpful for you. Job fairs and the places that you search for work are also tools in your toolkit. So job fairs, I talked about hitting the pavement, right? Just going into stores that have now hiring signs and dropping off your resume. Sites like the Discoverability Network, which are specific to inclusive employers and job seekers with disabilities. Other job matching platforms like Magnet, which is a larger job matching platform that's not specific to any one demographic. Job boards, Canada Job Board. I saw somebody in the chat mention Charity Village are all places you can look for job postings. And of course, courses to increase your skills, workshops like this one are all tools in your toolkit. Now, I mean, I've glossed over some of these, so I don't know, Megan or Elizabeth, if you have any thoughts that you'd like to provide that just maybe add a little bit more information to some things that I didn't go into great detail about, professional organizations, mentors, informational interviews.
I have always found that talking to people one-on-one, so whether that's a mentor or through the informational interviews, to always be the best step, because people are more willing to give you advice in person.
Yes, I like that. And it's funny you mentioned it. I made use of that as much as I could when I was looking for a career shift. And although I couldn't meet somebody in person, we had a video chat, which is as close as we could get at the time. And it was very useful. That person gave me a great deal of insight into how to use LinkedIn effectively. So yeah, if you can meet people in person, it's a little more personable, and you're more likely to get more engagement. So good advice. Thank you for that.
I do have a suggestion there.
Sure, what's that?
Hi, this is Mufa. Hi, Donald.
Oh, hey, Mufa. I recognized your voice.
Oh, that's all right. I just wanted to say that if all of us belong to one or the other disability, the chances that we are also affiliated with one or the other associations that help persons with that specific disability. And if you are, most likely those associations and those organizations have networking sessions. And I find that those networking sessions are very focused. And those networking sessions really champion your cause. So if you are a disabled individual belonging or identifying with a specific disability, find out what the association is or what the umbrella organization across Canada is that helps you or persons with your specific disability, get championship for you, and then see whether they have employment strategies and they have employment networking opportunities as well. That's a great tool to keep in your kit.
Yes, it is. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you jumping in, Mufa. And then we're going to add a few more to those. You see company websites. I mentioned job boards. I mentioned the Discoverability Network, and self-discovery tools such as the Aligned Personality Assessment, which I spoke of earlier, are all other elements in your toolkit. So a bit of advice. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basics about resume writing. It should convey your strengths and abilities. Should be abilities and strengths focused. It should be clear. It should include all of your experience that is relevant. Once you've been working for a while, you're not going to be able to include all of your experience on 1 or 2 pages in a resume. But, it could be volunteer work or unpaid work that's included. You want to consider what's relevant for the job. There should be a visual appeal. It should be easy to look at and easy to read. You want to double check it and triple check it and quadruple check it for spelling mistakes and grammar and things like that. If you have grammar or spelling mistakes in your resume, it will turn employers right off. If you're not sure, take a course or a workshop to fill in some skills gaps that you have if you want to have more to put on your resume when you're applying for a job. You want to practice your interview skills. You can do this with really anybody you know. Doesn't have to be a mock interview where somebody's asking you questions, although that helps. If you have any again, career counselors, job coaches, employment service providers that are supporting you, then practicing your interview skills with them in a mock interview setting or a role play is very helpful. But you could practice your interview skills by simply talking to people and sharing information that generally, you might expect is going to be asked in an interview. Why would you be a good fit for a job? Why do you want the kind of job that you're applying for? Why should they hire you? What are some of your accomplishments? And so on and so forth. And then review your online presence. Make sure it's appropriate. Make sure that your content has, is professional, is connected to the kind of work you're looking for, and again, doesn't have any errors. Double check what you're writing before you put it on there. So you see an example on the screen here. You may have already read the little box, but this resume, too much space for the header, right? That's reducing the amount of space you have to actually include the content the employer wants to see. Capitalization is important, and you don't necessarily need the employment experience to be all caps. You want to list achievements as much as possible, not duties. I mean, you're probably going to list your responsibilities, but you want to include what you achieved by performing those responsibilities. Your fonts should be consistent. They shouldn't be different from one place to the next, and italics are difficult to read, so better to avoid them. If you can align the dates to the left, it also makes it easier to read. You want to have the job title and your credentials appearing on the top line. It should be one of the first things up there. And the branding statement in this resume is Arik. It's not even really a branding statement. It's just stating what somebody's looking for. If you have a non-typical career path, consider how you're going to explain those or how you're going to explain gaps potentially in your resume or work history, why you might not have certain field related experience or why you've entered the workforce later. And you can certainly address these things by talking about transferable skills despite potential lack of experience in certain fields. You may have less paid work and more volunteer experience, in which case you're going to draw more heavily on the volunteer experience. And there may be a reference to a disability. Whether or not you disclose that is up to you. If you do disclose it, you're certainly not obliged to disclose your diagnosis, but you know, if it has impacted your career path, your job search, your work history, then you might consider including that in part of your story. And again, those career or employment centers or support services can always help you to determine how you want to approach this and create a really good resume, or the best resume possible, really, considering your unique situation. So the basics of online tools. As much as I love cats, that's not an appropriate picture. You want to make sure your presence is positive and professional. So again, when we talk about content, what are you including? Are you including everything? You really should be including what's relevant to what you want to achieve. It should be visually appealing and error-free. And again, you can take courses or workshops to fill in gaps or skills. So this example here, the cat picture, not appropriate, not professional, no idea what that person looks like. It's certainly not current. There's no content, doesn't tell us anything about the person. And you want to make sure that you get recommendations and that what you have listed in your profiles are error-free and written well. So get other people to double check your work if you're not sure. I do see there are questions in the chat. When is it acceptable for a resume to be over a page long? Typically 2 pages for a resume is actually rather standard. So you're probably okay with 2 pages. It's really difficult to say when it's acceptable for it to become longer than that. You really want to try and avoid it. Employers tend to get a lot of applications, and if they're getting applications of resumes that are 3 and 4 pages long, there's a good chance they might not read them. So, I think 2 pages is fine. But at that point, really, as much as possible, just try to keep it to the 2 pages and just, I know it's difficult, I've had to do it too, but just consider what is the most relevant for the job you're applying for, what is going to make you stand out the most, the achievements you have, the skills you have, and just include that. I've basically taken my education off my resume because it's not anywhere near the most important thing for the kind of work that I've been applying to these days. Well, not that I'm applying right now, but even the job that I got now. So that was one thing that, I would have expected to always keep my education on there, but I took it off because I needed more room for my achievements and successes related to work. So hopefully that's, you're welcome. I do hope that's useful.
Donald, I just have a point to that, is that what I have done is made a master resume that's quite a bit longer. And then based off the job, I shortened that master resume down to the 2 pages of just relevant to that job information. That's
an excellent idea. Using a master resume as a template. Thank you for sharing that. Very, very good idea. And then your resume is more tailored to the job you're applying to. So, more strategies. We talked about disclosure and that it's personal choice. I'm going to talk about it a bit more because it's something you really want to consider. You want to think about who you might be disclosing to, whether it's a recruiter or the person interviewing you, or to an HR person if you've already been hired. And then how you're doing it. You want to be abilities focused. One of the gentlemen I used to partner with, Ryan Shorten, who was the director of operations for Pizza Nova and is now the director of operations for a Toronto metalworking company, once said to me that people should be focused on abilities, not disability. So if you're disclosing you have a disability, you should relate it back to how you can do the job. that you might need changes to do the job, an accommodation to maybe do things differently, or a tool in the workplace. But in the end, you're relating it back to your ability to do the job. In terms of legal requirements, you do have to disclose you have a disability if it relates to doing a job properly or to health and safety. Can't be putting other people in in risky situations, or yourself imperiling your own health and safety by choosing not to disclose. That's you're simply illegal. And you're not misrepresenting yourself, right? You're always going to be applying to jobs that you can do. You might need to do them differently. You might need accommodations, but you can do the jobs. So if you are applying for a job that your disability does affect your ability to do it properly, you do need to disclose it. You don't have to disclose what your disability is, just that there is a disability and how it affects the job. And you can disclose at any point during the hiring process. It's up to you to decide when it's most appropriate. And then think about why you're doing it. Is it relevant to the position? Do you know you might need an accommodation? Does it make you more comfortable to, my keyboard is far more sensitive than I thought it was. Sorry about that. But does it make you feel more comfortable? Do you feel like it's just easier for you if someone is aware of the disability right up front? Or would it give you access to tools or changes that will help you do better in the interview, right? Maybe the interview is going to be written and you do better with verbal communication, in which case you ask for an accommodation to have a verbal interview as opposed to a written one, just as an example. So should you disclose? What should you disclose? I mentioned this already. It's really when you tell others about your condition or the changes needed in the workplace. And when I say telling them about your condition, I don't mean the diagnosis. I don't mean the treatment. I mean simply the fact that maybe you have a disability and how it impacts your job and the changes you might need in order to do the work properly. As you see there, not sharing the details of a diagnosis or health condition. Do you need an accommodation for an interview? This is important because you want to present yourself in the best way possible. So you might need some changes. And I mentioned, the example of maybe the interview is written and you do better with verbal. Here are some other suggestions or ideas. The physical space, you may do better with a large physical space or a small one. The time or timing of the interview, the method of communication I've mentioned. If you have a support person with you, right? Lots of people may bring job coaches to them to an interview with them just to help reframe questions. Or you might need a service animal, in which case you want to let the employer know ahead of time. So if you're not sure, you can ask for advice, an employment counselor or an accessibility center or disability organization or consultant, job coach. Even friends and family who know you well may have some ideas, although if you do have employment supports, those are better places to go. And if you want some ideas of what some common accommodations are for a number of disabilities, you can go to the Job Accommodation Network's searchable online accommodation resource. That is a mouthful, but you see the link on the slide there. All right. So we're almost at the end here. I know we're getting close to the time of 2 o'clock here. I've mentioned that accommodations are, they're really helping you to do a job you can already do. The important thing here is that you're applying to jobs that you're already able to do, and you can do the essential duties of the job. You just might need to do them differently. The standards are not going to be lowered. You're just completing the job in a different way. So remember to maintain perspective during your job search. I was going to go into more detail about this, but there isn't time. But perspective is everything in many ways. We are what we decide how important and how much value there is on something. And you really want to make sure that your perspective is a positive one, that you're giving yourself an opportunity to succeed, and that you're not being too hard on yourself. And I'm going to really conclude here because I know this, there's still more information to go through, but we're running out of the time. So I'm going to go through this really quickly, but make sure you know the job market you're applying to. The cost of hiring someone to a business is fairly substantial. So you want to make sure that you are providing good value for the employer, and you can explain why you're providing good value. Understand that it may take you time to find work, and that's fine. Just keep trying. The job market is always in a state of flux. COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that very readily. There's just no predicting what's going to happen next week. So focus on what you control, not what is out of your control. And if you need help, ask for it. And build a network, build a toolkit. Use your social media, use your personal contacts. Ask for informational interviews where you can learn from people who are in positions that you'd like to find yourself in if they're available to you. There are always people in your personal network who can help you with your job search. And always search in different places. We talked about using more than one tool. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. You don't want to search only in one place. Use many different tools. The Discoverability Network, diversity programs offered by companies, job boards, career fairs, and so on and so forth. And here are your key takeaways. You want to create a job search plan, identify and know your skills. Wow, it was the last slide. My keyboard is really sensitive. Apologies for that. But I think you get the idea. Create strong job search tools. You want to make sure they work for you. Be your authentic self. Bring your best self to your job search and make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. Give yourself breaks, give yourself rewards. Don't be too hard on yourself, and use as many tools as possible. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Elizabeth and Megan, for your contribution in those few instances where you were able to join in. I would definitely want to remember this time to thank our ASL interpreters, Rogue and Amelia, for joining us. We appreciate having you here and your translation of the many, many words that I spoke. So thank you. And we hope everybody enjoyed the workshop. You'll get a copy of the slide deck, and we hope to see you again soon.